I'm Gaetan Castelline with Cohesity. Welcome to this session. So in this session, we're going to be talking about Cohesity hyperconverged secondary storage and how it can be used to provide simple data protection for VMware, vSphere, and vSAN. Just want to make it clear, this session is really about Cohesity, so the solution that we have for VMware and for protecting VMs. It's not a generic session on data protection for VMware, right? So depending on what you're looking for, because we had some comments in the US, people telling us that, hey, this was maybe a little bit too focused on Cohesity. That is the objective of the session. So if that's what you want to hear, great. If you're looking for something else, we won't be offended if you choose to not to attend. So, but just as long as you know that that's the focus. So we're also very lucky today to have a customer co-speak with us, Paul, in the back there. So Paul Kostler is an infrastructure architect with Colliers International in the UK. A pretty new customer to Cohesity, I think, has a great use case. And so he's going to give us an overview of how they've been using Cohesity. Right, so before I get into the content, maybe a quick show of hands. How many of you are responsible for selecting or implementing data protection for VMware? About half, okay. How many of you know about Cohesity? Oh, that's good, okay, great. And for those of you that know about Cohesity, do you understand the value prop? Do you look at Cohesity? Do you think you have a good grasp of what Cohesity is about? Maybe just nods, so. Okay, all right. Well, hopefully this session will help clarify what Cohesity does. A lot of folks kind of think about Cohesity as a great backup solution, and we are a great backup solution, but we're not designed to just be a backup solution, right? So we call what we do hyperconverged secondary storage because the idea is to consolidate all of your secondary data, including backups, but not just backups, right? And so we're going to talk about that in the session. So, what's, just to kind of set the stage, what's the problem that we're setting out to solve? And before joining Cohesity about a year ago, I spent many years at VMware, lately on product management, on VMware vSAN and software-defined storage. And so we built out this stack, the VMware software-defined storage stack, which consists of things like storage policy-based management, VMworld integration for all of the leading primary storage arrays, vSAN. And all of this investment, it wasn't just VMware, there's also companies like Nutanix, Pure Storage. There's been a lot of focus, a lot of investment on primary storage, right? And we feel that generally speaking, primary storage is way better today than it was just a few years ago, right? So we're going from a space where people were deploying kind of these expensive siloed appliances to now these scale-out models, hyper-converged options, all flash to give you the I/O you need, much better manageability with policy-based management, per VM management instead of LUNs. So the space has really changed pretty fundamentally. And that's great. It was a huge pain point. But what has not been invested in much is secondary storage. Right? And when we look at secondary storage, this is kind of the way Cohesity looks at the storage landscape. And we think it's a little bit like an iceberg. At the tip of the iceberg, above the surface, you're running your mission-critical systems, your primary storage. Again, this is where we think there's been a lot of investment and things are going a lot better. The problem is, as you look underneath the surface at the space that we call secondary storage. This is all the storage that is not supporting mission-critical applications, right? So that includes backups, archives, cloud gateways, files, test dev systems, analytics storage, anything that's not actively running production apps. And this segment is consuming about 80% of enterprise storage capacity. Right, so it's a huge money sink, and there's just been very little innovation over the past few years. And this is also where most of the growth of data is going to happen. So if you look at the volume of data being managed by enterprises, 6 zettabytes in 2016, that's expected to increase to 93 zettabytes by 2025. That's the total volume of data being managed by enterprises. 80% of that is unstructured data, typically sitting in these secondary storage silos. Another big issue is we're just keeping a lot of data copies, right? So for each unit of production data, we're keeping on average 10 to 15 copies in these secondary storage silos. That is extremely inefficient. It's actually, according to analysts, that's a $50 billion problem. So $50 billion being spent just on keeping redundant copies of data. And the big issue is that legacy isn't keeping up. The problem with legacy storage doesn't scale out, right? So if you're looking at a data domain appliance, for example, it's a standalone appliance. It doesn't scale out. You run out of capacity. You got to do a forklift upgrade, bring in a new appliance, very inefficient. The silos, most of these solutions don't scale out, which means that you have to capacity plan, you have to manage a bunch of individual boxes, and there's a lot of inefficiency, right? So legacy is really not, we think, in a position to go and solve this problem. So what does Cohesity do? Well, fundamentally, the vision at Cohesity is what we call hyperconverged secondary storage. So why do we call it like that? Well, because it is based on the same design principles that companies like Nutanix or products like VMware Virtual SAN use, which means scale out, web scale solutions. It's actually a software-defined solution. We sell physical appliances, but it's fundamentally software, and you can buy it as software only and deploy it on pre-certified systems. But it's optimized for secondary data, right? So it's optimized to consolidate all of this secondary data on this single solution and to manage the data at scale, right? So that's essentially what we're setting out to build. And so that includes backups, and we're great at backups. We're going to go deeper on the backups in just a few minutes. But I also want you guys to understand that it's not just about backups, right? It's really about a bigger value prop. So now, just peeling the onion a little bit, how do we break down what we do? Well, essentially, it's really about three things. The first one is about allowing you to consolidate all of your secondary data on a web scale system, right? So you have your backups, you have files, you have objects. This could potentially replace, for example, on the backup side, data domain appliances, JBots potentially. For files, you're looking at maybe NetApp systems, Isilon filers, scaled out object, and being able to consolidate all of that on this web scale solution. That means that we expose globally distributed NFS, SMB, and S3 interfaces. We provide global deduplication, compression, encryption across the entire cluster. We allow you to scale the cluster dynamically. You can just add nodes, and we're going to expand the capacity of that cluster on the fly. And so that's the first piece of the value prop. It's about allowing you to consolidate that data at scale. Now, beyond that, I talked about the copy data problem and the fact that we're keeping way too many copies of data across secondary storage silos. The next thing we do is we allow you to reuse the data. So we enable you to create instant clones, zero-cost clones, at scale, to be able to present the data back to support a variety of use cases. So imagine that you've taken a backup, you're keeping the backup on Cohesity, but now you need a copy of the VM for test dev, right? You need to patch the OS or whatever, or your developer needs a copy of the database. We allow you to instantaneously clone that data to any point in time at scale and present it back to the developer or to whoever needs access to support a variety of use cases. Typically, those use cases will be things like recovery, test dev, analytics, but really any secondary data use case that you may have. Right? And so the idea here is to really go and eliminate those unnecessary copies of data. Right? Instead of copying data from a backup system to a test dev system, instead of having another copy sitting around in a data lake, you just reuse the data that's already sitting on Cohesity. And then the last big piece of what we do is really about allowing you to manage your data from edge to cloud. This is a software-defined solution. There's no proprietary anything in the underlying appliances. And so we can be deployed in the edge as a VM, we can be deployed in the data center, and we can be deployed in the cloud. And ultimately, the vision is to allow you to build a multi-cloud data fabric. I mean, there's all this talk about being able to move applications in the cloud, right? So if you look at VMware, what they're doing with VMware on AWS, allowing you to move VMs from on-prem to AWS, that's all great, but data is difficult to move. So how do you move your VMs if you haven't moved the data? And that's where we come in by allowing you to really build out this cloud data fabric, make your data available between public cloud and on-prem, and use that as a foundation to move your applications and your VMs. In the data center, we typically, so when people deploy Cohesity today, it is typically on a physical appliance, right? So it's a software-defined solution, but we also sell pre-configured, fully packaged appliances. These are what we call the hyperconverged nodes. There's the C2000, there's the newly announced C3000, which is a more dense storage node. We're also certified to be deployed on HPE or Cisco, right? So those are the most common deployment models today in the data center room. And so that's the third aspect of the value prop. So now I want to dig a little bit deeper and look at how do things change when you deploy Cohesity, right? How do we impact the data center? And this is a picture of what we think is a pretty typical data center. You've got up here, you've got your production systems, a bunch of VMs running on VMware, maybe Virtual SAN, maybe Nutanix. You've got physical systems, right? Your legacy high-end database or stuff running on AIX or whatever, so that you haven't virtualized. And then maybe some dedicated high-end databases. That's the production environment. We don't touch that piece, right? That's not where we play. But underneath that, right, is where we see all of this complexity. So if you're doing backups, typically you're going to have a media server to pull the data off of production systems, right? There's typically going to be a master server to manage that process. Those systems have to send the data somewhere, and that's typically going to be on dedupe storage like a data domain, for example. And you may have a tape library for long-term retention. You may also be swapping tapes and doing tape rotations off-site. So you can see just for the backups, there's already 4 different silos. Right? Now, if you want to send data to the cloud, now you need a separate cloud gateway. That's yet another silo. And that's just for the backup piece. Beyond that, if you want to do test dev, so for example, if a developer needs a copy of a VM to do development testing, or if somebody wants to test a patch or whatever, you need another system. Typically, it could be a NetApp filer, for example. You may have a data lake, and in most cases, you're going to have some type of file and object storage. Right? So that's what we look at in the data center. Now, when Cohesity comes in, and it's also, I mean, when I talk about the value prop, it's a big value prop, right? It's kind of a bold and ambitious plan, but we have very simple adoption mechanism. And typically, people can start using Cohesity just as a replacement for their dedupe appliances. Imagine you've got dedupe appliances that are coming off lease. We can replace that with a scale-out solution with global deduplication, higher performance, typically about half the cost. Right? So you can bring this in just as target storage for your backups. And then we integrate natively with the public cloud. So at the same time, we eliminate the cloud gateway, and we can support tapes, so we can potentially simplify that piece as well. The next step is to use Cohesity integrated backup. So we actually have our own backup product. It's called Data Protect. That's going to run fully converged on Cohesity. Right? So you've got these Cohesity nodes that are running data platform. On those same nodes, we're going to run the backup software. So you're eliminating the media servers, you're eliminating the master servers, you're replacing multiple point products with a single integrated product with a single UI. We can tape out if needed. Typically, we think the cloud is a much better solution, and we have native integration with the public cloud. And then once you've done this, and here you're looking at cost savings of 50, 60, 70%, even potentially higher. Once you've done this, now you can use the same system for test dev, right? You've backed up your VMs. Imagine you need to patch a VM. Well, just go to the test dev workflow on Cohesity, spin up those VMs, make them available for developers, and then take them back down. If you need to do analytics, you can do in-place analytics on Cohesity. Things like custom map reduce jobs can be done directly on Cohesity. And you can take a piece of the capacity, So Cohesity is going to give you a big pool of capacity. You can carve out a chunk and say, this I'm going to use for files or objects. I'm going to spin up an NFS or an SMB volume or an S3 object bucket and use that for scaled out files. Right? So at the end of the day, this is what the data center looks like. It's a lot simpler, there's a lot less complexity, a lot fewer data copies, much more efficient than deploying a bunch of silos. Also, I want to point out that Cohesity does integrate and play well with existing infrastructure. So you can be using the Cohesity backup product, it's called Data Protect. At the same time, we interoperate with existing backup software. Right? So if you're using Commvault or Veeam or Veritas Net Backup, or if you're doing database dumps and copies, if you have DBAs that are managing their own data copies, you can continue to use those products and simply use Cohesity as the dedupe appliance behind that, right? So as the target storage for existing backup software or database dumps, while at the same time using the Cohesity backup product for a subset of your applications. So we give you flexibility that way, right? You can use us any number of different ways. You can do you can do those two things at the same time. So you can use Cohesity backup on maybe 50% of the capacity of Cohesity, and then use the other 50% as a backup target for these other applications. Okay, so now I'm going to dig a little bit deeper on how we do backups and why Cohesity backups are fundamentally different from what you've been doing in the past. The key thing with Cohesity is because we have a completely integrated solution from the storage up to the backup software, we've been able to really optimize that stack. So when we take a backup, the first full backup is going to be taken just like with other backup software. We're going to take that first full image, we're going to keep it as a file on our file system. When the next backup comes around, what we're going to do is we're going to spin up a clone of that first full backup. And then we're going to grab the incremental changes. We do change block tracking with the vSphere APIs or different mechanisms based on what you're backing up. We're going to take the changes and we're going to combine them with the clone of the first full backup. And so what you're going to end up with is a completely height-rated image on the Cohesity file system. Right? So both backup 0 and backup 1 are fully height-rated images. They're space efficient because backup 1 we're only keeping the deltas, but because of the way we're doing the snaps and the clones on the file system, everything is instantly available. The next backup comes around, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take a clone of backup 1, grab the changes with change block tracking for the second image, map that to a file on the Cohesity file system, again, fully height-rated image. And this is very unique. We're actually the only company out there that does backups this way. And why does this matter? Well, it matters because on the one hand, you can do very frequent backups. We can back up as often as every 5 minutes if you want to. And then, in addition to that, we have this full catalog of fully height-rated images all the time. Right? So if you want to go back to any point in time, whether you want to go back to the last image or whether you want to go back to a point in time that was 10 days ago, we give you instant access to all of your copies of the data on Cohesity. And that matters because imagine that you get hit by a ransomware attack, for example, and you want to go back to the last known good point. We let you go back to that point instantaneously instead of having to go and rehydrate images. We also do this at scale, so you can recover hundreds of VMs in a few seconds, right, to any point in time. It's interesting, just a few days ago at VMworld in Vegas, we announced a new solution with VMware Cloud Foundation. I'm not sure if you guys know VCF. It's the stack from VMware, right, that has NSX, VMware, vSphere, and vSAN. And the problem with VCF is there's existing backup solutions that will back up the VMs that are running on VCF, right? But there's no solution, or before we announced it, there was no solution that would actually back up the VCF management stack. And so if you lost your VCF environment, you had to go back and recover all those management VMs manually. We give you a solution where you can recover the entire VCF stack, not just the client VMs, but the management VMs, in less than 15 minutes. Right? And again, that's a very unique solution, and it's enabled by this, right? By the fact that we're mapping backups to this very powerful file system underneath. We also have very tight integration with VMware. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I think this is kind of standard stuff. Most backup vendors have this, but I think kind of matters to show that we do this too. Very tight vCenter integration, so we're going to kind of capture all the objects managed in vCenter and present those in our UI. We allow you to do policy-based management of the backups, right? So we're automating as much as we can. So once we've kind of identified all those objects from vCenter, we allow you to assign individual policies to each VM. It could be like a gold, silver, bronze kind of policy. Those are going to specify things like retention periods, how often you want to do the backup, and then we'll automate the whole process to give you, to basically meet those SLAs. In terms of moving the data, we use the vSphere APIs for data protection. Nothing unique there. I mean, that's kind of the traditional mechanism that people use for backing up VMware. We enable instant recoveries. This is a little bit unique in the sense that imagine that you have a few hundred VMs, you lose all of them, like you lose your primary storage device. We'll allow you to instantly recover those hundreds of VMs. We're going to spin up an NFS volume on Cohesity, present that back to vSphere, and we're going to be the primary storage device for the duration of the recovery. As soon as your initial primary storage is available, we're going to move things back to the initial primary storage. Right? So instant recoveries, but at scale and to any point in time. And then things like VRA plugins, VRO plugins, all that stuff for self-service. Right? Right, so this is a bit more detailed on the VRA integration. Right, so if you're using VRA, you're used to providing kind of the self-service capability for your application developers or application teams. When you deploy an app, you've been able to assign a storage policy via vVar or vSAN and storage policy-based management, but those storage policies up to now were only applicable to primary storage, right? You didn't have any policies for secondary storage. What we've done here is we've extended those policies to allow you to also have data protection definition in there, right? So how often do I want to take my backup? What's my RPO going to be? How long do I need to retain those images? What's the replication requirements? So what we've done with the VRA plugin is really allow you to extend those policies to cover those secondary storage requirements as well. So I want to talk about the cloud because we've spent a lot of time integrating with the cloud. I think when we speak with customers, a lot of folks are trying to find ways to use the cloud. I think there's a desire to be able to more effectively leverage the public cloud, but at the same time, most folks find it difficult, right? What's the use case? How am I going to use that public cloud? What about security? And there's all sorts of questions that come up. And what we've done is we've tried to make it as simple as possible to allow you guys to use the public cloud for a number of use cases. So we integrate with Microsoft, AWS, Google Cloud, and any S3 or NFS compatible cloud. And we allow you to use the cloud in 3 different ways. The first one is what we call Cloud Archive. This is really, think about this as replacing tape with cloud. Right, so what we're going to do here is we are going to, based on policies, right, so you can define policies for your backups, and you can say anything that's older than 30 days, for example, send that to the public cloud. So in this case, backup 0, we're sending it to the public cloud based on the policy. The next backup comes around that needs to be sent, backup 1, we're actually going to send only the unique blocks, right? So deduped, compressed, encrypted, so that we're very space efficient, bandwidth efficient when we're sending that data. And we're sending the data directly to something like S3 or Glacier or equivalents in Google Cloud and Microsoft. We also index. This is pretty cool. So if you're going to do tapes, you have to manually manage the process. Right? You've got to stick in the tapes, do the tape rotations, send the tapes off-site, have them vaulted somewhere. If you need to recover, now you've got to bring the tapes back, put all the tapes in, even if you just need to recover one file. With Cohesity, we're going to index everything as it comes in. Right? As we ingest data into the system, we index all of the file metadata. That's going to give you Google-like search on all the data sitting on Cohesity, but also Google-like search for any data that we've sent to the public cloud. So imagine you're looking for a file within a VM. Just go to your local cluster, do the Google search for that file name. We're going to tell you, well, that file is available. There's maybe 2 copies locally, maybe 5 copies in the public cloud. Which one do you want to recover? And we allow you to recover that individual file or the entire VM back on-prem. Right? So way more manageable than tape, and actually pretty cost-effective as well. We have a lot of folks that are kind of hesitant to use the cloud for this, thinking the cloud is expensive. In this kind of use case, it's actually not very expensive because there's not a whole lot of I/O, right, going to the cloud. What's expensive in the cloud is I/O. And this is not driving a lot of I/O, so it's actually pretty cost efficient, and we think less expensive than tape when you factor in operating costs and all that complexity of managing tape rotations. So this is the first use case. Oh, also, you can recover to a different cluster. So imagine that your main cluster goes down completely. We have enough metadata sitting in the public cloud to allow you to recover the complete images to a new Cohesity cluster. So this can also be used for disaster recovery. The second use case with the cloud is what we call cloud tier. This is about allowing you to burst capacity in the cloud. So imagine you have your local Cohesity cluster, and you're like, I'm running out of capacity, I need to extend, but maybe it's going to take me a month to bring in a new Cohesity cluster. In the meantime, you can just extend the capacity with the public cloud. What we're going to do is we're going to automatically identify cold chunks of data, and we're going to send those individual cold chunks of data to sit in the public cloud. When the data becomes hot again, we'll bring it back on-prem. This is different from Cloud Archive because we're not keeping a full copy in the cloud, we're just keeping individual chunks. You can't recover from this data. It's really about extending the capacity of your cluster. And then the last one, and this is probably the most exciting, is what we call Cloud Replicate. This is, in this case, we're actually deploying a Cohesity cluster in the public cloud. And this is already available today on Microsoft Azure. It's going to be available very soon on AWS. And we're looking at Google as a next step. So you go to the cloud application catalog, you select Cohesity, and we'll deploy a Cohesity cluster running on cloud VMs. Once you have Cohesity running in the cloud, now we can replicate data to that Cohesity cluster. We do some neat things, like we turn the Cohesity cluster off when it's not being used, just to save on those compute costs in the cloud. If you want to replicate the next backup, we'll bring it back up, do the replication, and so on. So what's cool about this? What does this give you that Archive does not give you? Well, first off, it's a replication, right? So the time between when you take the backup and the data is available in the cloud is a lot less, right? So your potential data loss is a lot less. But then we're also now managing the data in the cloud. And that allows us to do a bunch of cool things, like imagine your main cluster goes down. We can automate the recovery of VMs in the public cloud. We also allow you to bring up VMs for test dev. We do the VM format conversion for you from VMware to Microsoft, for example. We allow you to bring the data up for analytics. And we enable all sorts of cool use cases in the public cloud. Right. So that's kind of the next step. And when I was talking about the multi-cloud data fabric, this is really what we mean. Right? You can deploy Cohesity at the same time on Microsoft, on Google. You can select which data you want to have sitting locally, which data you want to have sitting in any one of those public clouds of your choice. Right? So that's Cloud Replicate. Also, just a few words on the scale-out aspect. We think scale-out really matters. About 50% of Cohesity engineers actually spent a lot of time at Google. And in fact, our founder used to work on the Google file system. And the way these scale-out technologies function, I mean, there's just a bunch of advantages compared to just individual silos. From a capacity planning standpoint, imagine that you need, say, 100 terabytes of capacity on day one. If you're going to deploy a conventional dedupe appliance, like a data domain, for example, you're going to need to over-provision capacity, right? Because you don't want to run out. I mean, you're basically sizing the head based on your needs, not just of today, but you want to make sure that you have enough to meet future needs as well. With Cohesity, you just deploy a cluster that meets today's needs. And as your capacity needs expand, at some point, even the traditional appliance, you're going to run out at some point. And at that point, you've got to do the forklift upgrade, you've got to do the data migration, take out the old box. I mean, it's a major pain point. With Cohesity, you just keep on adding nodes. It's very simple. It's a cluster. You just add in a node. You can add one node at a time. The minimum is 3 nodes because we're going to do things like erasure coding or replication between nodes. But after that, you can just add individual nodes. You can mix and match node generations, right? So put a new node into an older cluster. You can mix and match node sizes. And we're automatically going to rebalance the data between all those nodes to make the most effective use of that capacity. That means that there's never any downtime. If you need to do a software update also, for example, we're going to do that software update on a rotating basis. You never need to take the cluster down. Right? So that's one of the advantages, but there's a lot of advantages related to just being scale out, software-defined, distributed software. Right? From a TCO standpoint, I touched upon this. We enable very significant TCO savings. I think Paul is going to talk about that briefly, but it's just a lot less expensive. If you look at backup, we are putting so much money into backups these days. It's not uncommon. If you look at the list price of backup solutions, dedupe appliance, backup software, master servers, media servers, the list price on that stuff can be upwards of, in US dollars, $10,000 per terabyte. That's way more expensive than what people are spending on primary all-flash storage. Why are we spending more money on backups than on primary production all-flash storage? It makes no sense. And we can come in with a solution that's just a lot more efficient. In the vast majority of cases, we're looking at 50% TCO savings and higher. We've seen numbers as high as 80% TCO savings on backups, right? Just because it's just so expensive today. And so just to close it out, we've talked a lot about backups, but I also want to remind folks, while backup is often that first use case for which customers purchase and use Cohesity, once you have Cohesity in place, you can also use us to replace your test dev systems, your data lakes, analytics storage, and files and objects. Right? So it's really about going beyond backup and consolidating those multiple silos. So just to summarize, simple data protection, significant cost reduction, going beyond just a backup. And that's really why we call this hyperconverged secondary storage and not just an integrated purpose-built backup appliance. Right? So with that, I am now going to pass it over to Paul, who's going to give you kind of an overview of how they're using Cohesity at Colliers. I think it's a great use case. And then I'll come back and just show you guys a quick demo.
Thank you. Right, you'll have to excuse me. This is the first one I've ever done, so bear with me. My name's Paul Kosler. I work at Colliers International. I'm part of the EMEA team, regional technical architect. So I look after 49 offices, 2 data centers in Europe, about 4,000 users, and a lot of waste data, frankly, that, as I'm sure most of you know, is quite difficult to get rid of. Where were we? So I've been there about a year now, and I got brought in to basically look at how things were done, how things could be done better, and change, basically. Disruptive technology is what I enjoy and what I like. We had your standard flex pods, we had pizza box servers, we had a load of ProLiants, some random storage, we had some JBods. There was things everywhere. There's also a lot of QNAPs, which Getan enjoyed viewing last night. We had backups that were but they weren't really backups. They were, let's X-copy that somewhere and it might work and it might not be off-site, and we don't really know what's going on. This needed to change. There's lots of regulations coming out, and frankly, we're a big company and we needed to do things better. And that's where kind of Cohesity came in. So what did we do? Hyperconverged it's a bit like the word cloud. It's just a word, but frankly, there are two companies that we invest heavily in now. They are Nutanix and Cohesity, and our data center has gone from multiple racks to 4U. So I have a single Nutanix block and I have a single Cohesity. That's all I need right now. I'm sure over time that will expand, but you can the scale of economy, it works quite well. I have one in London and one in Amsterdam, and they talk to each other. Why did we look at Cohesity? So I had a legacy Hitachi storage device that was coming up for end of life. Support renewals were going up and up, and we needed to do something about it. So I looked at where could I put my secondary data, my file shares, my home directories, kind of all that stuff that I don't want to store on a Nutanix, quite frankly, because Nutanix is lovely and fast, but it's quite expensive. So we got a Cohesity device in, plugged it in, set it all up. Oh, look, it does backup. Pressed all the buttons. Oh, look, it's backing up everything right now. And from there, kind of the use case grew and grew, and we can replace tapes, and we can scale this out, and it was very cool. I don't know how many of you guys have seen it, and obviously Getan will run through that, but it really does just work. It's very simple, and it's very good. Like it says up there, we completed our POC in 24 hours. Literally, I just pressed all the buttons at the same time and went, oh, is this going to work? And it did. And while I did all that, I upgraded it at the same time, much to ease that's amusement. So what are we using Cohesity for? So like I said, we've got about 49 offices across Europe. We've got infrastructure in about 20, 30 of those. Various amounts of data, various amounts of random technology. We've got some Linux, some Windows, some stuff that we don't even know about, that guys just spin up as and when they need be. But frankly, we needed a solution where we can guarantee that data was available and that we were backing up. And also off-siting is key, because frankly, like I said, I went into one of our offices and just saw a rack of QNAPs and just had a heart attack. So we needed to make sure that we could take our data where we needed it, and if that site disappeared for whatever reason, I could get that data back somewhere else. We also, as I'm sure most of you probably still use tapes. Tapes are, I don't know, they're a bit of a dinosaur, I think. Yeah, that they work, but who enjoys calling up Iron Mountain, for example, and going, I need a tape, it comes tomorrow, I need to index it, I need to restore it. It's old. You don't need that with Cohesity. As Getan said, things like cloud archiving, we use extensively. So we are moving away from tapes completely. Fast. Like I said, when we plugged this box in, I literally clicked the button and it backed up everything during the day. With the combination of Nutanix, obviously high-speed networking, etc., it really does deliver. We were previously Veeam and DPM. They don't compare. The speed of recovery as well is quite outstanding. The test dev functionality that Getan referred to, we're starting to use that for DR testing. So we replicate obviously all our backups to the secondary data center, hit a button, oh look, there's all my virtual machines in that data center, in an air bubble network, it works. Thank you very much. Easy, I think I've covered that. And To coin a Nutanix phrase, it literally is one click. There's a button in the GUI that says recover. You type in what you want, it comes back. You can download it, you can send it to wherever you want, really. I can upgrade it on the fly. There are many things that are really just simple. Disruptive technology doesn't need to be difficult. It just needs to work. And that's what Cohesity is all about. Getan referred to, obviously, total cost of ownership. Had we not done this, I would have had to buy storage, I would have had to support that storage, I would have had to maintain support on various different backup products, I would have had to go on and out to my regional offices and you need to do this, you need to do that, oh, where are we going to get, it becomes a nightmare and a bit of a muddle. One product, and one product only. There we go, the pictures did make it in. So, as you can see, just a few QNAPs. Bottom left is my old legacy HDS, and on the right is my current data center. That UCS will be disappearing. So that is literally what you can go from and to. We use virtual edition heavily to accomplish that. Voila.
Okay, awesome. Maybe just one quick question for you guys. So you talked about backup. I think you're also using us for files, right?
We are,
yes. Replacement. I think that was also kind of interesting.
Yeah, so like I said, we first investigated Cohesity. It wasn't really to replace backup. I needed to just replace file services. So we had lots of Windows VMs serving out files on that Hitachi. I needed somewhere to store that. And we brought that into Cohesity. We run our Windows VMs on the Cohesity natively. It's backing them up, replicating them obviously. The archiving is there, and fundamentally I can increase that capacity linearly. I don't need to do full lift upgrades anymore. So.
Right. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. That was great.
Thank you.
Okay, so just to close it off, demo. It's a pretty fast demo. It's just showing you the recovery, just to give you a feel for the UI and how things flow from a UI standpoint. And then after that, we'd actually open it up for questions if you guys have any questions. So this is the demo, and this is just the vSphere web client, right? Nothing fancy. You guys know this. And what we're showing here is the cluster, right? So it's a vSAN and Cohesity cluster. Hang on, just a sec. I'm just changing a setting here. And we're going to go and back up all of those VMs in the cluster. So you can see there's about 16 VMs. They're not lightweight VMs. I think we're looking at something like 2 terabytes total. You can see kind of the cluster stats here on vSAN, about 1 terabyte being used with a dedupe ratio of 1.35x. But so anyway, so those are the VMs that we want to back up. vSphere web client, all pretty standard stuff. Now we're going to go to Cohesity and take a look at the Cohesity UI. So this is what you see when you first log on to Cohesity. And a couple of things to point out. You can see system performance, you can look at storage. On the bottom left, you actually have data reduction summary, and you can see that on this cluster, there's 272 terabytes of logical data, but only 427 terabytes of physical data. Right? So that's a 650x data reduction ratio. That's a combination of global dedupe. We do global inline variable length dedupe or post-process dedupe, that's up to you. We compress the data, we only backup change blocks, so that's how we get to those data reduction ratios. And you can see there's 21 protected VMs. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the data protection, to the recovery workflow, sorry. So that little yellow, blue button on the top right, that's what you click to recover. But there's other options. If you look at the top, test dev workflows, right? So when you do test dev, we're actually not recovering a VM, we're creating a clone of a VM that you can play around with. Analytics is about doing custom analytics jobs like MapReduce jobs and so on. But in this case, we're going to go with recovery. So we click on recovery, And it's going to ask you what you want to recover, files, VMs, or databases. In this case, we select VMs. This is where you get your global Google-like search on all of the VMs that are being kept on Cohesity. So we type in a piece of the name. It's going to show you the different backup jobs where those VMs are available. So we're going to select that backup job so you can see we have a total of 16 VMs that need to be recovered. We're going to select all of them. So this is also interesting that we're not recovering just one VM at a time, right? So you can do a job where you're literally going to recover hundreds of VMs at the same time. In this case, it's only 16, but it could be much bigger. So you're going to add those to the job, and there we go. Continue. We're going to change the recovery option. So when you recover the VMs, you can choose to rename the VMs, right? So for example, in this case, we still have the production VMs up and running. We don't want to interfere with those VMs, so we're going to change the names. We're going to add a prefix to all of those recovered VMs. There we go, prefix, suffix. You can then change the recovery location if you want to recover to a different primary storage device. In this case, we're not going to change the location. You can choose to detach the network, again, if you don't want to have interference with your primary production VMs. By the way, this is very useful if you want to do a DR test, for example, and recover VMs without impacting production. And then you're going to choose your recovery point. And this is, again, very cool. In this case, we're going to choose the last recovery point, but you can literally go back to any point in time, right? And this is very unique. If you look at conventional backup software, typically they're going to keep the last image fully hydrated, or maybe the last couple of images fully hydrated. In our case, every single point in time is instantly available, right? And so here you can see a menu. We've been backing up on an hourly basis, and you could go back to any one of those points in time to recover. Shoot, sorry about that. Okay, so this is where we were. So we're choosing that last point in time. We're saving those settings, and then we're going to initiate the recovery. And then the really cool thing is what's going to happen now. You're going to see that the VMs are going to come up. It actually takes less than a second for us to take a clone of all of those VMs and present it back as an NFS volume to VMware. Right? After that, things can take a little bit longer because VMware has to power on the VMs and so on, right? So after that, you're looking at VMware lead time to do the recovery. But in this case, we have the 16 VMs being recovered. You can see the list of them. And actually, now we're going into the vSphere web client, and we're going to see what's going on. And we're going to do a refresh of that web client. They're not here yet, right? You can't see them up. We're going to do a refresh. And then they're going to show up with their new name in this list. And so this is just in a few seconds, right? Those VMs will pop up. You can see all the VMs with the July prefix and the suffix that we added, right? So those are all 16 VMs. Now, if you take a closer look at the VM and you look at what's actually going on, you can see that the VM is actually running off of Cohesity storage, right? You can see that detail here. So what's happened is the VM is actually powering on from the Cohesity NFS volume. And then once the VM's powered on, then we're going to initiate a storage vMotion to get the data back to the original primary storage device. But the cool thing is your Cohesity can drive a good amount of IOPS. I mean, we're not primary storage, but you get a few tens of thousands of IOPS per node on Cohesity. And that gives you plenty of capacity to recover hundreds of VMs and run those directly from Cohesity. Right? So that's what's going to happen initially. And then you're going to see that we're going to initiate a storage vMotion. And that, of course, takes a lot longer because now you're moving all of the data back to primary storage. Right? So you've got your VMs. You can actually double click, see what's going on. You can see that The recovery was initiated at 8:27, and at 8:29, those VMs were powered on. If you go to the recovery details, you can actually see the status of the recovery, about 21% complete. So it's not complete because we haven't finished the storage vMotion operation. And this is what's going on here. We're actually moving the data back. It's showing you the progress of that data movement, right? So that's it. That's the demo. All very simple. There's a lot of other stuff. So if you would like more info, we have a pretty big booth with a lot of people on the show floor. We also have another session tomorrow where we're actually going to be showing the VMware Cloud Foundation, the VCF content, the recovery, the 15-minute recovery for the entire VCF stack. And then we're also going to stick around for the other 10 minutes and answer any questions that you might have. So I'm not sure if anybody has any questions at this point. And also, they asked me to ask you guys, please fill out the survey. I think it's on the mobile phone only. But if you could, please just take a few minutes and fill out the survey. I think that matters, especially for the VMware people. So with that, we're going to open it up to questions. Does anybody have a question? Yes. Oh, actually, can I ask you to use the mic? Because they're actually taping the voice, so we have...
Yes, I have a couple of questions. One is related to the possibility of cooperating with existing backup systems.
Yeah.
You mentioned a few. I would like to know if it works also with Avamar.
Avamar, okay. So the question is if we interoperate with Avamar. So essentially from a Cohesity standpoint, we're going to present standard NFS and SMB interfaces, right? So for example, Veeam, you're going to integrate via SMB, in that backup, you will integrate via NFS. I think Avamar, can only use data domain as a backend. I could be wrong on this, but I think that's the only backend they support. Does anybody know? Is that you're confirming?
I don't believe it does standard integration with NFS and ZIPs.
Right. So that would be a question for EMC, right? Whether they would support some other NFS or SMB device.
I'm asking on behalf of my backup admins. That's why I don't have that kind of.
Yeah.
Okay. The other question is related to Oracle, and if you are able to back up Oracle VMs running on OVM hypervisors, and if eventually this can be used also as a disaster recovery solution.
Okay. So we do not support OVM as a hypervisor. However, you can do in-guest backups using Oracle RMAN, right? So it's not hypervisor level. It's going to be guest level.
So
right?
we would have to use an agent on the virtual machine.
Well, you would use RMAN, and we can manage RMAN for you, right? So you can schedule the backups in Cohesity. We would just look at that as if it was a physical system. Mm-hmm. And we do source-side dedupe, and it's very efficient. But we're gonna use RMAN behind the scenes to actually do that.
Using an agent.
Is that?
Hi. So when it comes to database backup, really there's several options that are available to customers. You can go down the route of installing an agent on the actual server, the system itself. You can also, what we find very common is that DBAs within an organization will actually ask the storage guys to provision them some space, and then they'll do their own exports of the database to that area, and then the backup guys pick up the flat files. They do the backup that way. So it's like a two-stage backup. What we can do is that we can offer the ability for the DBAs to basically manage the entire backup process themselves by running things like RMAN scripts and spreading data to all of the scale-out nodes. So you see dramatic performance in terms of backing up, but most importantly, when it comes to recovery as well. We can use all the nodes in the cluster to initiate that process. Replication?
Replication work also?
Yeah, so basically when we present ourselves as, for example, an NFS export, we can replicate all the data that's been put in there by the database applications and replicate it if we want to. Yep. And also cloud integrate.
Thanks, Izad. Any other questions? No? No questions at all? Okay, all right, thank you very much. And we'll be here for a few minutes if you have other questions that you want to ask privately. So, all right, thank you.